learning strategy. Oh, thanks. Digital learning strategy for biology at MIT. She mentors instructors, postdocs, and students, manages projects involving MOOCs and hybrid learning experiences, and conducts research on the design of digital learning experiences. This is really cool. 3 of her MOOCs are ranked on the best online courses of all time list by Class Central. And prior to her current position, Mary Ellen earned her PhD in biology from MIT and then taught at Harvard. Her broader roles include co-leading the MIT Digital Learning Lab, organizing conferences and workshops on digital learning, and serving on committees across MIT. So I'm very pleased to welcome Mary Ellen. She'll give her talk and we'll save questions for more towards the end. So Mary Ellen, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to share with you work that we've done over the years to help give some ideas of what I mean by the nuances of data-informed MOOC design and what we've learned. So why at MIT do we invest in creating open online courses? And that really comes down to the core of our mission. In our mission statement itself, we say to advance knowledge and education in STEM and other scholarship to best serve the nation and the world. So my start with MOOCs, massive open online courses, that many of you probably are familiar with on this Zoom today, started in late 2012 when we were beginning to discuss a possible introduction to biology MOOC at MIT. And at the time I was still working at Harvard, but then by that January 2013, I switched back to MIT to work full-time on the creation of this introduction to biology MOOC that we released after a few months for the world. And that started, my career in the space. So what I want to discuss today is how our studies that we've worked on over the years have challenged common assumptions that people make when designing MOOCs. Some of those assumptions will be that we'll discuss today and give you highlights from the studies include that video length matters the most for engagement, that you need to organize your course content into many small sections and not get too long, that open online courses must run self-paced, that you need to proctor and police for controlling cheating, that increased enrollment is good for engagement, the instructor presence does not influence much with enrollment or engagement, and instructors do not have to revise after initial course development. And these are assumptions that many, or at least some people have when it comes to course design. Before I get into those specific studies, I wanted to just mention that in the essay in Frontiers, we discussed how in all of our MOOCs, from the beginning, we really have the principles of applying the learning sciences in what we do and how we do it. And in this essay, we summarized how we use the learning sciences and the research behind those decisions. So in the outer ring, you can see that we are discussing the different learning sciences. So it may be the multimedia learning theory or the idea of concrete examples. And then in the colored circles on the inside, it's showing how the learning sciences apply to the various course aspects, what learning sciences will apply to what course component. So it may be summative assessments, formative assessments, the multimedia. So to address the assumption that I mentioned earlier for study 1, is video length the most important? When we worked on this study, we weren't going after that question. That wasn't the purpose of the paper. What we noticed were that we created animated videos that you'll see here on my left. And then you'll notice that in this video, we did the process of scripting to have precise language, to have following multimedia principles for video design, and it was fully animated with voiceover. And that is in contrast to the majority of the videos that were in our MOOCs at that time and still continue today, where we have someone teaching in an MIT classroom and we are showing what they are writing on the board. We're adding in images where they may have used slides in the classroom. And we noticed that in the animated videos, there seemed to be a drop off in engagement compared to the classroom videos. So we wanted to look, is there a trend? Is this just one video, or is there really a trend where there's a lack of engagement? So the percent of learners who viewed the video and completed it, it was much lower, between 60 to 65% for the animated videos compared to the videos that were in the classroom. And what also you can notice in this data are that the videos that are in the classroom or even animated, there's not a trend that's very noticeable as length gets longer. So the length is not the biggest factor that's causing the loss of engagement here, but it's actually the video style, despite designing them with the best intentions of learning principles. For the second assumption, does content structure influence engagement? So what I mean by that is when we have, you may recognize from an Open edX type of course that you have a learning sequence and you have videos that will appear in a row. You may call this week 2, lecture 3, some sort of title of content. And usually there's questions interspersed between videos. So this is a video, and then this may be a question that appears immediately after a video in between another short video segment. So in this study, we actually didn't use the MOOC population, but we used students at MIT who were using the MOOC materials in their courseware, in their course components. And they had these materials all as completely optional, so nothing was for grade. And so we wanted to know, does the position of ungraded material impact the student's behavior to attempt the problem? So there's no requirement to do these problems. We just knew there's a high activity in these practice materials, and we want to see, does position matter? So what we did is set up a content experiment with groups A and group B. Group A would have the first problem that we had in the experiment inside the video sequence, meaning it would appear between those video segments, or outside, meaning it would be in another section labeled problem set or practice problem set. Then we would have that same group A have another problem that would be the reverse. So it wasn't that one group got all the same type in the same type of location, it was a mix. And then when we looked at the behaviors of the students completing these optional questions, over 20 questions, we had 18 that they were more likely to complete if the question was inside the video sequence than if it was outside, if it was in some section called problem set, practice problem set. And we completed that study over 2 years, and the results reproduced that 16 out of 18 of the problems in the next year were inside, more likely to complete when they were inside the video sequence. So the next question and study that we did was looking at instructor-paced versus self-paced. So the assumption may be that in an open online course, you need to run the course as self-paced so that you're giving learners flexibility to complete and having more of a chance to complete, more of a chance to do the work that they want to do within the optional course. So instructor-paced means that content is released in gradual pieces. There are due dates and certain times throughout the course, and overall there's a short duration of the course. In this study, it was about 50 or 60 days for the courses. The self-paced courses, the content's released all at the start. It's available fully for anyone. There's one due date at the very end, and these can be open for as long as a year. So in this study, that we completed, we looked at the impact of the self-paced courses versus the instructor-paced. And for us in this quantitative biology workshop course, we had years where it was self-paced and instructor-paced, and we could compare the different years. So in this case, 16 and 17 were the years that were self-paced, and we went back to instructor-paced because we had this feeling that there was less engagement in the self-paced years. So then we want to look at not only just in terms of numbers, but in proportions. Do we see that there is less or more engagement in these different types of modes? So if you look at participated, the people who have clicked into the course at least once, explored, meaning they clicked half of the chapters of the course, completed, meaning they passed a threshold to earn a certificate or just pass the threshold to complete, and then verified, meaning that they signed up for the paid certificate track. And if you look at those metrics for the self-paced years compared to the years where it was instructor-paced, almost always especially for the explored, completed, and verified, they're lower in percentage of learners compared to the instructor-paced time. Now, did the self-paced learners take advantage of the greater amount of time? And yes, because when we looked at when they submitted a problem, we can see that they submitted from the first time they submitted something to the last time they submitted that a question in the course, that happened in a greater number of days. So some people are taking advantage of more than 300 days in that range. And you compare that to instructor-paced, where instructor-paced is really within that 50 to 60 days because the course starts and ends within that period. And so for the people who complete it, they took a larger range of days. And for the people who complete it, we noticed that actually they took a total number of days that were fewer than when it's run in instructor-paced. So that means that even though it's open for greater number and they're using a larger range, the number of days independently that they're logging on and completing questions were actually smaller. So that may mean self-paced is helping more of the people that can go quickly through a course. So overall, we didn't find that self-paced increased engagement metrics for participating, exploring, completing, or verifying. And we also looked at posting to the forum, attempting a problem, or watching a video. And we didn't find that the completers submitted problems in a greater range of days, but they did submit in a fewer number of days and attempted fewer problems per day. In the next study, I'm going to talk about a competency exam model that we originally started with the Introduction to Biology course, and we also use for another biochemistry MOOC as well. In this model, we are looking at assessment and what can we do for summative assessment to maintain the integrity of the certificate so that the learners who do earn the certificate can feel like they have really have something of accomplishment and that cannot be easily taken by others in a way where cheating is the mode to get that achievement. And so that happened with early on. There were some studies in after a year or two of MOOCs, just showing how learners, because it's so easy to just register for a course, you could register for with multiple usernames and use techniques like harvesting to take answers from one course to another. So to combat that sort of behavior, we designed this course setup and structure so that within the course, there was formative assessment for learning. It was available self-paced with feedback. It was non-graded. And we had that set up from the beginning where we released all of it at once and everyone could just work at whatever pace they wanted for several months to work through material that were in between video kind of questions, but also more in-depth problem set exam kind of questions as well. And then we had a competency exam that would be the summative assessment in the course. So this was available for one specific week at the end of the course run. It was timed. We had verified track access only. And even though that may be more common now, at the time it was one of the first courses to do that sort of verified track access only for the summative assessment. It was randomized per problem and multi-part questions. So every page of the exam there's one of 4 different versions and they look very similar. So even at first glance, it looks like you have the same exam. There's no feedback on correctness, whether they have it right or wrong, or explanation, and they have no exam access after completing. And there's no discussion forum during this time for people to publicly discuss something, that we just give them email access. So in this exam, we try to also design it so that it's best to really measure, do they really know the material? So there's over 100 questions. It's distributed across Bloom's levels from simple explain, knowledge base to more of the application and prediction. And then we try to test as many learning objectives as possible within the course. So in this study that I completed with former MIT colleagues that are now in Israel and Spain, we took an approach of looking at aberrant performance behaviors. So when students how well they performed on questions, were the patterns looking odd? And we compared a run where there was no competency exam model to 4 runs of having the competency exam model. And we could see that every time the competency exam model of the course ran, there was less of this aberrant performance. Then we looked at a signature for response time patterns. And we saw that when the competency exam was running, there was less abnormalities in the data for the response time that learners gave. And these, for both cases, are talking about only the people who completed and earned a certificate. In the next study, I'm going to talk about enrollment. And does that mean that enrollment leads to higher engagement? So like many others during the pandemic, we looked at the spike that we had in the number of learners. And you can see here that during the 2020 runs of the course, the enrollment rate was much higher than prior to the pandemic. And this is work that we did with Katie Blackwell, who's now a graduate student in the department, but she did this as a remote undergrad project before she became a grad student. And we wanted to look at the engagement. So not only just how many enrolled, but then are they participating? And through 2019, the percent who participated, clicked into the course at least once, ranged from 68 to 71%. But then the 2020 runs, we could see that there was a spike in March 2020. But then by July 2020, there was already a dip in that participation. The people who registered or enrolled didn't necessarily participate in the course at all. So then we looked at the viewing of videos, and we looked at everything like problem set and forums, but the video viewing really stood out as having a difference. So compared to 2019 and March of 2020, you can see that there's pretty high certified learners, the people who got a certificate, how they watched the number of unique videos viewed by a learner in this case were higher. But if you look already at the July 2020 run, you can see that these numbers do dip a good bit, that the unique videos viewed by someone as an auditor, a verifier, or someone who's certified is lower, meaning that there's less engagement. And we can look at that sort of pattern in another way if you look at the percent of people who join the verified track. So over the runs, the 2020 runs had the highest number of people signing up for the verified track, but as a percentage, that was also higher. When you look at the percent who earn a certificate on the verified track, that decreased for the 2020 runs. You go from almost 18% down to the July 2020 run being around 12%. Then another interesting behavior that we see in this course model is that it's not necessarily that the learners are failing the exam, it's that they don't even show up and try. And so if you take the percent of verified track participants who actually attempted the exam and passed or did not pass, if the percent who passed of those who actually tried, the numbers are much higher. It's roughly 45% before, and then when you get to July 2020, that run, it goes down to about 35% of learners who pass of those who tried. So higher enrollment doesn't necessarily mean these learners are more engaged. So another aspect is not just designing the course, but then what do you do when the course is live and running? Does sending course emails matter? I think the sending of the emails has dropped off a lot since over the last 10 years. And I think, you know, it's hard to maybe measure, is there something happening? Is it worth sending or not? So this is showing an example of on March 2nd, I sent an email to everyone to start another course because this was a course that has ended or recently ended. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. And then in that course email, I said, you know, here are other courses that you can go to that will be starting soon or is open. And then I use bit.ly links so I could look in an informal study kind of way and see that on March 2nd, I see a spike in the number of clicks to my links for all of those courses that I mentioned in the email. So I know at minimum, people are clicking to see the registration pages of that course when I send those emails. And then you can see overall, you know, newer courses had fewer numbers here and older courses have into the thousands or even tens of thousands of clicks of the links that I created that I'm sharing by email or through our website. In engagement, it may be a little bit harder to measure. The blue line here shows active learners, people who just click into the course, and then orange and green are watching a video or trying a problem. And so you see fluctuations week to week, and this could be due to emails or other factors. And in this course, this was after the March 2nd email, but maybe there's like some more people clicking in, but not necessarily a big impact for engagement in problems or video trying. But then in other courses that are happening more recently now, I've been sending some emails, and we're also in the last month or so, and you can see that there's a pattern of increasing of problem completion as well as video watching. And that could also just be a factor of the course reaching the point of a summative exam in this type of course. And so pulling apart engagement here would take some more study to really understand what matters. But in terms of enrollment numbers, the thing that I've seen can impact enrollment the most is just MIT sending an email to people who have signed up for other MIT courses, and specifically the MIT X courses that are open online courses. And when we've had genetics, cell biology, in this case, 2 of our cell biology courses and genetics course advertised in an email that went out on January 6th, then I could see that the enrollment spiked significantly on those around that date of January 6th for those 3 courses that appeared in the email. In this case, we also had another cell biology course open for registration that was not included in the email, which served as a good control, the green line here, to show that if it's not in the email, you won't see that spike of enrollment. And there's other cases where little smaller peaks, maybe because of the emails I'm sending, but relative to the MIT email, it's not noticeable in the plot here. And the final study that I'll talk about today is just the idea of course revision. So after you design the course, you've run it, you've looked at how students have performed, then what do you do? Do you just leave it to continue to run, or do you go back and do a revision? And I think it's easiest for all of us to just ignore it and not go back and do the work of evaluating how is all the content working for learners. But we wanted to set up a structure and a revision framework to think through our process of revising courses. So in this course, in this work that we did with Moni, Caitlin, Darcy, we can show that our general pattern is to run the course. In this case, we wanted to focus on questions that were used for summative assessment and identify low performing questions. Then hypothesize the source of the low performance, evaluate the cause of the low performance, and then implement revisions and see what the results are. So to go through that process again, we have identifying the low performance. And then we had two categories for source, either instructor or learner-based. And you'll see in a second what we mean by instructor-controlled versus learner. The instructor side is more like unclear wording or narrowness in the grading. That was more our fault for maybe why the scores were low, performance was low for a given question. And the learner was really like what we're assuming by the answers they gave, or maybe discussion forum post, is that there may be inadequate scaffolding that's sort of our fault as well as maybe on the learner side, but there could be disregarded instructions or failure to synthesize multiple concepts. So after we hypothesize the cause, we would decide a mode of action. So adjusting the grading code or modifying wording or emphasizing key instructions and giving hints maybe. So is that work worth it? Is there a difference when you go through that process? And we looked at a cell biology course and analyzed the quiz questions for that course over 3 runs. And we found that 21 questions met the criteria of having a threshold of lower than 70% performance of people getting that question correct. And we looked at dividing those questions into sources. We found 4 that we categorized as instructor, and we categorized 17 as learner. Then we had causes that we divided into the different categories given here. And then we decided how to improve. And in some cases, our improvement path, we just decided to leave unrevised, because in some cases, maybe there's low performance, but maybe it's just a harder question. And there's not something that's obvious to us of what's missing or why they're going to get incorrect, other than it just being a harder question. So if we look at the results for these changes over run 1 compared to 2 and 3, you can see with the green and purple bars that there is a jump in performance to above the 70% threshold after making these revisions. It's not for every question, but for a number of them, we see that jump, and then in a number of cases, that increase is significant. So in this case, the time is worth it if we want to be sure learners are getting the best experience when they're going through these quizzes, not feeling frustrated, and possibly not deciding, oh, I want to quit because this is just a frustrating experience. So going back to the 7 challenges, 7 assumptions and the challenges that came up within these studies. So the first one, video length matters the most for engagement, but I've shown you in our earlier study that video content and style actually can override the impact versus length. To have the advice and assumption to organize course content with many small sections. And I've shown that learners will engage more with fewer breaks in the content sequence. And there have been other studies since that paper as well that showed in different ways that having different sections didn't necessarily help. It actually caused drop off. The assumption that open online courses must be self-paced for flexibility, that there's not evidence, at least in our study, that it resulted in more engagement or completion by having self-paced mode. There's other reasons to choose self-paced versus instructor-paced, but it might not be that you're aiming for engagement or completion. It's very common practice now, and with a lot of discussion, the need to proctor or police control cheating, because that discussion became so prevalent during 2020. But we have shown that just course design alone can deter cheating. And you may not need to go to those other lengths if you can design and with as many techniques as possible, one setup to deter cheating using evidence-based methods. Increased enrollment would mean more engagement, but we find that, does not necessarily correlate. A lot of people who may be enrolling, especially during 2020, might not have been as committed. And also there's other factors of attention and distractions, especially during that time period, that maybe have led to less engagement. The instructor presence cannot influence enrollment or engagement much, but we find that even though it might not be huge spikes from an instructor email, that there is something going on. There's definitely numbers there showing that the instructor emails matter, and that the school can actually impact the things like enrollment even more. And instructors do not have to revise the course after initial development. And we feel that revision improves learner performance, so it's worth the time and effort to continue to revise as you're running open online courses or other online courses, or any course really. So the key takeaways for today is just that open online courses are not all the same. Make decisions considering the nuances. Always be testing your assumptions. So even though it might have been shown in one paper to work a certain way, that doesn't mean that your course content and your videos are the same scenario to have the same outcome. And always be looking at the data. There's access to so many sources of data for online courses, but often it's the case that people don't even look to see what's going on week to week. And if you use it as best you can, then you may be able to find these patterns and these abnormalities to look into more detail. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today. Looking forward to any other questions or discussion on these topics. And I hope giving you this summary and a little bit of highlights from the studies we've done has been helpful to make you think about these design processes. Thank you.
Thank you. As folks have questions or comments you want to raise, I'll just invite you to use the reaction button on the bottom bar and go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll take questions from there. As folks are kind of thinking about what you'd like to ask and getting situated, though, I'll start with one. It's about study 5 and enrollment and engagement, and I just wanted to hear you kind of pick apart a little bit more. Like, of course it was a unique time, and there's all kinds of factors in there as to why somebody might not have been super motivated in July, in summer 2020. And so I was wondering, like, if you reran that study now, do you think you'd find kind of the same? Do you think you'd find the same result?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question for the time, because I feel like, without looking, doing the study of the detailed data analysis, that the engagement has stayed at this lower level since that period of 2020, that the prior to 2020 period, people were more likely to keep going, to get further in the course or watch more videos or do more problems. And that sort of behavior is just dropping off even more after the pandemic. And so it could be something with attention that is, has changed over that period. Maybe there's something with less motivation, but ideally we want to have an have people be intrinsically motivated so that they will complete these courses or do whatever parts they want just because they, out of their own interests and goals want to learn. So I would say probably you would still see those kind of results. I think in general, I've seen cases where when the courses are advertised in some way to a more broad audience. So like if a link is in the New York Times or in an email that goes out to all edX learners, that's going to lead to more people joining and quitting than if it would go out to a more targeted email list that would be people who have done biology courses before. Because the types of people who are taking the courses maybe not having the expectations that others who have taken the MITx courses in biology or other disciplines have for this being truly a full experience of trying to complete a course that's very like what's happening on MIT campus. And it's not something you could just do in a few hours in one day to complete. And so we, would get more people who may enroll but quickly lose interest.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience here? Oh, Peter, I'm not hearing you. I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
That's good.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So question, Mary, thank you again for a wonderful presentation and sharing of the studies. I was wondering, for the first study regarding the video styles, were you able to suss out further characteristics of these styles of videos that seem to elicit more attention? So you have the looks like what looks like a traditional lecture kind of video, and then the kind of the animated example kind of video. Were there other kinds of styles that you observed, and things that you noticed as far as learning engagement and how long people attended to these videos?
Yeah, so we definitely looked at other factors, like what could be causing this. And we were able to eliminate more than really pinpoint the cause. We were having different hypotheses of, okay, what if it is the speaker? Because the speaker we had in the animations, it was a woman, and then the speaker in the lecture, you could see it was mostly, for most of them, it was male speakers. So then we tested using all of the voices of the people who were involved in the course and having it overlaid over an animation. And we did not see a difference in that engagement drop. Still, no matter who was speaking, we would see that drop. And then we would, our ending theory that we didn't really, necessarily go off of is maybe it's just down to natural voice. So when someone's speaking in a room with MIT students, it's much easier for them to engage person to person, be looking at the audience, having feedback of that audience, and being able to speak in more natural tone. And these are really subtle things that to most instructors, right? It's not necessarily noticeable, but you may feel that when you're watching a video online. And then when we have the scripted videos, someone is more or less reading the script, even if they practice as much as they could, it's scripted and it's maybe not natural tone or natural flow, even though the person we have doing the overlay of voice was, really good at doing that, but it doesn't mean that it sounded as natural or as maybe as engaging. Or it may be something where the students really just feel like in the classroom was the priority, like, whatever was happening in the classroom. And if it was something animated, maybe they were considering this was more optional. And that was another idea we had. Like they just feel like, oh, it's just an animated video, so I can ignore that. But if it's in the classroom, then I have to take that much more seriously. So those are some ideas we had.
Thank you. Just a quick comment observation. I wonder with the learners that you surveyed or observed, mostly MIT students, I wonder if the expectation of these students, given that they're more predisposed to or used to lecture style kind of courses versus, let's say, someone in the workforce, right, outside of school. I wonder if that had something to do with the fact that, oh, I'm more used to watching a lecturer, a professor in a classroom, therefore I'll pay more attention versus someone else who, again, is in a workplace and looking for professional development. I wonder if you might have a comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, that would totally make sense, except that study was done with the MOOC learners. But we know MOOC learners, tend to be professionals who already have degrees too. So maybe the same type of people who, they go to college, they have this signaling that this is the type of format I'm supposed to learn in. So maybe the same sort of question, even, but it wasn't the MIT students. But even with the MOOC learners, this is the pattern that we were seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the experiment there is like putting a robot in the classroom and like
Yeah.
finding them up and letting them go, I think.
And we can do that now, right, with AI. So just have the robot give the lecture and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, you do that at MIT and let
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask one more. This is on study 7, where you were kind of looking at these low performing questions and and then revising them to sort of get at to make them better or whatever. And I was wondering about if you looked at like sort of are there students who are getting most of those questions wrong, more of those questions wrong? Like how sort of distributed were those incorrectly answered questions across the learner population, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely in these quizzes learners that are doing poorly and doing really well throughout those questions. So there's some people who would generally like have no room for improvement because they're already getting most of them right. But I think as an overall population, there's room for improvement. We didn't necessarily look at jumps between low performing versus like average versus high performing students, to see where the gains mostly were. But we were looking at, in that same study, repeat learners, because in MOOCs, people can take the course as many times as possible. So are we seeing this jump just because people are familiar with the content more and they're like taking the course a second or third time? And we were able to eliminate that as a factor. Like that wasn't the reason why we were seeing an increase in performance, that it wasn't because of those learners, the people who are taking the course multiple times.
Question. Okay, well, I'll just invite us to thank Mary Ellen one more time. Thanks for joining us and sharing your studies. Chelsea, if you want to go ahead and put up the next event in an event coming up quite soon is the EdTech Showcase. For those of you around campus here, we'd love to see you. This is 2 weeks from Wednesday, I think. Come join us in the afternoon. You can learn about a couple of the different tools in the showcase. And following that, our next research seminar will be given by our very own Sarah Dysart in early March. So we'll be looking forward to hearing about the study she did for her PhD there. So yeah, come join us again either on the 21st or in early March for our next one. And thanks again, Mary Ellen, and thanks to you all for joining this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for joining.